Hey folks, Steve here with another Nations in Arms video. In this video, we will be covering 1796, the War of the First Coalition, which marks the last 2 years of the scenario here left. After we do this, they'll be at 1797, and that'll be the end, though maybe towards the end we could try to say somebody's won. I've got a couple of concerns around some of that, which I'll get here shortly, but let's set the stage for 1796. This is a pretty important year, all things considered, um, for a couple of reasons. One, this is when the French units finally get their full combat bonus. So, on much of the French units, there is a +2 combat modifier. At the beginning of the game, we had no access to that. It was treat as if they were zero. And then in previous turns, we were able to use them as a +1. Well, now any unit that has a +2 can treat that as a +2, which gives the French another boost to their die roll modifiers in combat that is quite significant. And in fact, anytime they're fighting the Austrians, they're going to tend to be at the advantage. At the British do have some +2s, but in limited number. So the qualitative advantage that the French now have is going to help them a lot in these final phases of the scenario. So they're feeling pretty good for that reason. The other thing is there is this plucky leader that has joined us whose name is Bonaparte. Now, I am putting him in command of the army of Italy. This was previously the army of, I think, Germany, and I just swapped the counters around a little bit to make it a little more historically accurate. But you can see Bonaparte is a most excellent leader. His non-commander side is just as good as his general side, and he can command 12 units, which is not the highest number on the map right now. The Austrians have some leaders that can command more, but he has an initiative of 5, so he can activate on any chit pull of the French. And that 5 is better than 3s or 4s, so it's going to mean that he can catch enemy stacks that are trying to get away much more easily. And then he's got a combat modifier of 3. So he is just absolutely a monster, right? Our little ogre. So he does have a box around his name, or box brackets, which denotes that he can come in via a card play. Now, that card did not come up in our card draws for the year. And show the card itself. The card, which comes in 1795, is Vendémiaire, where Bonaparte is immediately appointed to an army, blah, 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 blah. Now, it's a 1795 card, and it's a public card, and it would have to be played. Here's the thing. I was trying to figure out, is that the only way that Bonaparte is allowed to enter, or does he come in 1796? Because it is 1796, and just again, quickly to show, his entry availability date might be kind of hard to see, is 96 through 04. So the way I interpreted that, and this is, I could see where someone else interprets it differently, that if we had played the card, we could get Bonaparte in a year earlier, which would be very effective. Or if we don't play the card, or the card never comes up, he can come in 96, or he's available to be placed on the map in 96, which is how I chose to go with it. Maybe somebody will say he can only come in with the card, but I feel like if you leave things only to the cards, you just have too high a probability of something just not happening that kind of needs to happen. Or else, why else are you playing the scenario, right? Certain things should just be a part of it. I think that's a nice, happy compromise, right? We didn't get him in early. That would have been nice. But Bonaparte is in. He is in the command of the army of Italy, and he is probably going to take that theater home this year. We'll see. Couple of other things. Each of the armies have now been built up, rebuilt up. So the Austrians have a large force here that will split or head down into Italy. Various setups along here is really the core of where Austria is at. Um, I should also point out that, everyone's got more leaders this year. The Austrians have Charles, who's quite good. He's a 4-16-2, so a 4 activation, meaning this leader can activate whenever the Austrians really want him to on their chits. He can command a large number of units, and he's got a 2 combat factor. Not as good as Napoleon, but still pretty good. And there are other leaders out and about that have been of the same caliber we've seen. The French also get a number of skilled leaders that are quite good. So we have right now, I transitioned Joubert out of command of an army to instead be a cavalry leader for the moment, but Massena is available. He is available from 96 on, so here he is. He's also quite good, right? 4-16-2. He's in command of the army of Germany. And we've got still Hoke. He is in command of the army of the North. We've got some reinforcements with Jourdan. Again, we talked about Joubert. I did not build the Spanish army. We needed the production for replenishing units, but I will eventually want to get the next year the army of Spain down here to reinforce the French. What concerns me is the potential for a last minute, last ditch, like gamey bullshit way of winning is the coalition, where if they can take one measly fortress in French national territory in the last couple turns of the game, or even the last activation, then France will be deprived of a victory and it will be a draw at best. Let's say that the French have achieved all of their other objectives. They've taken these areas over here, they've retained up here. Well, if they just lose Bayonne or something, or Perpignan, then it's a draw rather than a victory, or something along those lines. So I struggle with that a little bit. That feels like it's almost too easy for the game to just avoid being a French victory if the French have pretty much won every other way. And for some, I don't know, Portuguese or British army to pop down here really quick and do something feels a little gamey and lame. So I guess I offset that as best as I can by building up the Spanish army next turn and just making sure that we have territorial defense, or we build up some more militia that can be placed out and about. I don't know, but that's going to bother me if it just becomes a little too easy to make it a draw. But very generally, it might just be a moral victory if the French have achieved everything else and they lose, like, again, one fortress at the last minute arbitrarily where there's no chance to respond. It just sort of happens. I would think that's kind of lame. So there's a weakness in the victory conditions, I guess. I might try to change it so that instead of it, I mean, if I were house rolling it, maybe I would say instead of it being a fortress being the impact, because it is, they have to control every fortress within their national territory. I would maybe change it to every province or something, right? So, like, if you wanted to control Languedoc, you would have to take not just Perpignan, but also Toulouse, or not just Bayonne, but also Bordeaux. So it's not just one measly fortress and it screws over the victory condition. So I don't know if other people have played this and feel the same way or feel differently. Let me know in the comment section. Again, that my change would be not fortress, but every province, so that the enemy actually has to have be in military control of a French province. I think that's better rather than, again, this sort of sudden death goofball thing that could happen where the French don't get a chance to respond and they don't get to win because of that. That doesn't seem so good. Maybe that's French biased. I don't know. The other thing that I will point out, it's going to be a little hard to see. I'll try to zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. You'll notice I have rebuilt up some of the British. They had this army marker from last time. This is really going to be an empty marker. I need to put a leader on him, but I forgot to do that, I guess. But the rebuilt main British army is up here in Edinburgh. Now, why is it up there, up near Scotland? Well, we haven't talked about it majorly. The cards that were drawn, only the British player actually got public events that they're going to have to play. But one of them, significantly, is the Highlands card. So the British have to play this, And it will mean that the French player gets to set up the Highlanders' Scottish leader and army up in Scotland, and that could prove to be a very annoying problem for the British, right? If it's not a strong force, but if we went gallivanting as the British onto the continent and we didn't have any strength behind to uh, keep things under control, then, um, well, Britain could find itself in some deep, deep trouble. So the nice thing was that the British player drew the card and not the French. So it's not a surprise. The British know that the rebellion is brewing, that it's going to happen. And so they have set up the rebuilt army in the north and will act swiftly to play that card first in the spring here and get that stack generated. And they're going to immediately they're going to go and shut it down and get rid of it, rather than wait till later in the year to play it, because then they just have less time to deal with it and then get units situated back south for other events. So it's going to be take care of this problem quickly, prepare for it, knock it down. It does mean that the British are going to be kind of out of the campaign seasons probably this year. It's going to take enough movement and activity that they're not going to be able to do much else. So this just does give the French the opportunity basically to try to crush Austria as much as possible, get into a good position for the winter. And then the last year will be probably when the British can try to make a final set of landings in France, while the French are probably in control of northern Italy, probably in control of Switzerland, may be able to knock Austria out of the war entirely, and should hopefully have enough home defense forces to stave off any British invasion. So I think the odds of France winning are looking decently well, looking pretty good, but they're going to have to they're just going to have to try to do well this turn. This will be a critical year, so Bonaparte being present, that's a big deal. Um, all these other leaders, the combat bonus is really important for the French. The Austrians are going to try to strike back, but they've been getting the tough end of the stick for most of this war, so it feels like they're going to have a hard time. And again, the British just have now distractions to deal with, while the French can capitalize uh, on their victories. So um, yeah, there you go, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and take care of the spring turn, and we'll show the aftermath here for you. Okay, here we are after spring, and it's kind of a mixed bag for everybody. In the north, the British went to chase the Highlanders, and they ran away. So uh, that ended up soaking up the British activations, and that's just going to continue to be maybe a you know, I don't know, cat and mouse game up there, maybe keep the British distracted. In the German theater, Massena managed to basically eliminate an Austrian army, and the remnants of some of the units that were going to join it are retreating back to Munich, which puts the French basically conquering Baden by the end of the year, and may be on the way to eliminating Württemberg and Bavaria from the Austrian sphere, which would decrease the number of units that the coalition is getting on the board, period, which could help shift things. And his army is actually in pretty good shape. It hasn't lost a whole lot, so Massena is in a good position. I'm trying to get something set up to where we can make something happen with Switzerland, because we do need to pick it up. We have Geneva, but I need to keep a unit parked there for right now, so it's kind of a weird situation. But in northern Italy, where the big show happened, we had our first major battle, because the Austrian army had basically two gigantic armies together, and came down to Mantua and faced off against Napoleon. Napoleon faced them on the field, and we used our first set of tactics cards, which the way it basically works is, you have a deck of the tactics cards, and for major battles you use them. You can also optionally use them whenever, and you basically get one card drawn for each side. Then you get a card for each combat modifier, then a couple of other circumstances, and then you can use basically a card plus one more if you pass a leader check, The Austrians actually got a flank attack and a screen, and Napoleon got a one bonus to their card, and were able to. They used the I think it's called Crests card to nullify the Austrian artillery advantage, which they did enjoy. Really, Austrians had all the modifiers in the world. Napoleon was able to offset those, and technically, the uh, French won the battle due to a good die roll versus a bad Austrian die roll, but the Austrians did not demoralize, and the casualties were horrific. It was 5 casualties to Napoleon, which eliminated much of the army of Italy, and the French kind of rolled off the chart and did 7 steps to the Austrians. However, the Austrians still have, let me see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 steps. They started with 18 steps. So the Austrians have 11 steps, and there's no signs of them slowing down. I just decided to throw all my weight into this strike against Napoleon. The problem is the way into Austrian territory is in danger from Messina. So there's sort of a tough thing going on there. And then the French decided to do some crafty stuff. So Napoleon beat a retreat back so that he can get reinforcements, but he did send a cavalry commander behind, pushed out some Venetians that were holding Mantua. They didn't take Mantua. They can't even properly besiege it, but they're kind of sitting out here in the swamp, out of supply, I might add, but they're trying to put the Austrians out of supply, which um, I just realized that they're not actually putting them out of supply. I don't think. Let me count. Wait, one. Okay. So, yeah, these guys are trapped out of supply due to the river, the fortress, and these guys behind them. Uh, what do you call it? Covering Mantua. So these guys could be in some trouble from attrition. That's my thinking. Like, we'll sacrifice some cavalry to try to attrit the Austrians, because no matter how good Napoleon is, he simply does not have the forces necessary to defeat the Austrians at this point. He can't make up for the fact that he's got a smaller army, and he's kind of too far away from Messina or even Joubert to make a huge difference. But Hoke and the North Army is headed south to try to link up for the summer turn, which is going to potentially be a very long turn, but it's going to be difficult just with the fact that we've got to get an army into Napoleon's hands, and then he's got to try to strike back against the Austrians. So the Austrians actually could take back a lot of northern Italy, but they're going to have a problem in that the French are basically stomping around in their backyard. So we'll see how the summer goes, but the French, for as good as things were going, they just can't top a gigantic Austrian army, just too many men all in one place for them to deal with. So we'll see what happens. Okay, here we are after this summer of 1796. So the British in the north, kind of hard to see, but just to round things up very quickly up here, the British did manage to catch the Highlanders and eliminate them pretty handily. And now they're marching back down south to hop on some boats and, well, be set up for maybe next turn with a naval impulse to try to do something to the French position. In the German theater, the French have pushed on. They're occupying Württemberg. They've taken control of Munich and Ulm and are basically set up now to knock those guys out of the war, those minor powers, or conquer them, however you want to look at it. And then it's going to continue to be a push on maybe Austria, because at this point, there won't be much standing in their way. The Austrian mega army has been suffering a tremendous amount of attrition and is outside the gates of Genoa trying to besiege it, and it's doing quite well, but it hasn't completely eliminated the fortress, which means that they've just been sitting and taking some more and more attrition. They're actually down to, let's see, that's 5, 6, 7, 8 steps, which is actually putting them low enough that Napoleon could make a strike at them, but he only had enough movement basically to get up to here nearby. So it's kind of a near run thing. I think it's going to really depend on the chit order next turn in the autumn to see, does do we have the French try to pounce on the Austrian army and knock them back again. And then the HRE powers have basically one corps left that they could be trying to maneuver with. And it's just not clear if they're going to be able to do it well or not to make a counterattack. So they could try to cut off and relieve Württemberg, maybe cut these guys out of supply. It's really hard to say. So both sides are getting exhausted, but we'll see what happens here in autumn. It could be a very important year as the fronts continue to bounce back and forth. Okay, here we are after autumn, and there's been a little bit of a rope-a-dope here with Napoleon kind of pushing the Austrians back. The Austrians managed to evade him multiple times and have pulled back to Mantua, which is sort of a very clear dividing line. Napoleon did take Milan again, and so it's very tough. Both armies are basically pretty close in strength. The Austrians are a little bit more advantaged, but Napoleon has better modifiers. So it's been it's the one thing that can hold Napoleon at bay, I guess, is numbers right now. The Portuguese tried a naval invasion that failed, and so they were back home. The British have set up for a naval invasion in the last year, assuming we're not going to get very far here in the winter. And the French forces in Germany have set up to knock much of the southern German states out of the war, which will put them in closer swinging distance to the Austrian homeland, which is advantageous. The coalition do have a winter quarters card that they could play, but I don't think they want winter to last very long. It could turn up to be very bad for them overall, especially because their home territory is not that far from being able to be taken over. Now, I don't think the French have the strength to push much farther than they have in Germany, but there could be a situation where the French could coalesce around taking Innsbruck, which is right here, and that could be a very big problem because then it would force the Austrians to come into Italy this way, which is a bit harder to maneuver forces into, though they do have Trieste. I guess it's not so bad. But basically, it's just a big challenge space now of, can the French push into Austria? Is there anything else the Allies can do to distract the French right now before another production phase kicks in? It's really kind of hard to tell what could happen next. So, yeah, we'll take care of winter. It might be very fast, but that'll depend on the chit pull. Okay, well, winter wasn't very long. We basically had basically two chits pulled before winters came up, and they were all coalition aligned. The most significant thing here being that the British did make a successful attack on Amsterdam. Trying to see. I guess winter doesn't have any effect on naval invasions or our ability to do them. So the British army landed, took Amsterdam, defeated the fortress with a detachment in it, which then in the peace phase they've conquered it again. We lose our units that were there in Brussels, which kind of puts the French in the north a little off balance. Because Holland is one of the victory provinces that matters for victory purposes, this is a coup for the coalition. And it does mean that, I guess, the British are reinstating Holland under their control again. I'm still a little cautious that I'm maybe not doing that right. But you just, hey, we conquered Holland. Okay, Holland, you're on our side again. We build up your units with your leader, get back in the game, and then they keep switching back and forth maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's how it's supposed to work. Separately, Baden has been conquered by the French and is going to be reinstated. Same with Württemberg. So there'll be a few units that come up. Technically, the French did not take over Bavaria because Bavaria technically still has Ratisbonne, this fortress, which is still technically Bavarian, though we do have Ulm, and the capital So I didn't think of that all the way through, but it would have meant that Bavaria is still in the game anyway. I just didn't have enough force composition there. So there'll be an ability to build up some units in that territory, but it will be easier for the Austrians to kind of push back. And then, of course, the Austrians down here will have plenty to deal with on their own anyhow. So um, definitely, I think a case of the French pushing as far as they could push. They've managed to make some things easier for themselves because a lot of these other Austrian controlled miners don't really have units to use. So I think we've done a lot of good, but again, the coalition being able to drop an amphibious invasion to win, and now there's a need for a French force to be headed north to contest them is just a real pain in the butt. It gets back to that, like, is it a little too easy maybe for the for the coalition to do naval amphibious invasions and take stuff? Maybe. Um, it's not like they did. It's not like they did a lot of amphibious invasions in the Napoleonic era. Just not a lot of them. So there are negatives, but I think the main thing is they just didn't have a lot to work with. The defenders here didn't have a lot to work with to defend against what the British were doing. So that's it for 1796. So basically, the French in an okay position, but they've got a lot of ground to cover before the end of the game. If they don't do it, I suspect we're going to end up with a draw game, is what's going to happen. If I go back to the scenarios and try to figure out who would win, the coalition wins an automatic victory. Or, okay, if at the end of the last season, France does not meet her victory conditions and the coalition controls Flanders, any other result is a draw. So Flanders is going to be important. We can't, technically, the French don't control it because, at least to my understanding, you need to have the capital of the province as well, which is Brussels. If I'm reading the rules right, and to be honest, I don't know. I can't say for certain that I am. And I guess this just gets into more of the like rules trickery of, do I interpret the rules the way that they're supposed to be interpreted? Yeah, it seems like you need the capital of the province in Brussels. So we've kind of got a problem now where we're going to need to make that up somehow, because if we can't get something in the north, doesn't matter what the French do, the French lose. We can at least keep it as a draw if we can get back into Flanders as the French and maybe take some of the remaining territories we need. Basically, the French do need to take Mantua to consolidate control of Lombardy. They need to take Romagna, which is not a hard thing to get, but we've still got to clear this. And technically, we still need to get into Switzerland. This force does conquer Geneva, and they're kind of earmarked to hop over and get into Zurich next year. So I think it could be anybody's game at this point. It's really going to come down to the British in the north trying to hold Holland and Flanders, the French pushing every other way that they can. I think anybody could win, which is interesting. Going into the last year, anybody could win just based on how these fine tooth, comb actions play out here. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Glad we could get another year through. Next video will be 1797 and the conclusion of the War of the First Coalition. Thanks for watching. Take care. Keep on gaming.